deprive Muslims of equal rights under Indian law and in Indian society. It uses seemingly legitimate tools of law, policy to sanction discrimination. I'll come to it later because the law passed by Parliament, NRC is based on the provisions in the Citizenship Act. So this is the use of the seemingly benign law to create a divide in the society. The one time in recent history that such legally sanctioned discrimination existed was in Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy. Both fascist regimes centered on deeply disturbing ideologies and indefensible moral values. To use the CAA as a tool of divisiveness against people of certain religions as inferior is not only against the reality of India we live in, but it also in legal terms on completely unstable ground. There are many problems with this deadly combination of CAA with NRC and NPR. It is worthwhile to remember that the NRC was laid by the Supreme Court itself. Like an executive, Mr. Ram referred to Mr. Gautam Bhattia's article that the rights court becoming an executive court. So Supreme Court led this whole exercise of NRC in Assam. It cost the exchequer 1600 crore over 5 years, and Assam was practically grinded to halt. The majority of 1.9 million people were excluded from National Register. And you will be surprised to know that most of them are Hindus and not Muslims. There was tremendous hardship caused to the people, many people, regardless of religious or ethnic background. I was part of a People's Tribunal on the NRC and its impact on Assam. And one should have seen those videos, those accounts, how the people suffered, how particularly women suffered. See, where from you get these documents? A woman is married in some another family, and where from she is going to, you have to travel hundreds of kilometers to get your document. People have spent their earnings, the whole lifetime saving to get the document. So I support that when that young girl stood and said, "Kagaj nahi dikhayenge." I support her. So this divisive agenda at the heart of this NRC exercise, and there are many failures of NRC which were clearly. And now the Home Minister wants to replicate this exercise for whole of India. Just imagine what is likely to happen in this country if this NRC is to be implemented throughout the country. Those in favor of CAA attempt to defend it on grounds that it is a benign, even a benevolent and well-meaning legislation. Defenders argue that it protects vulnerable people in Afghanistan, Bangladesh and Pakistan who are persecuted by religious leadership. But if you ask about other kinds of persecution, it's not necessarily on religious ground. There can be persecution of people because they are against the regime. There can be many other grounds. So what about other kinds of persecution? Then why only 3 countries in the region are guilty of such acts? You are met with complete silence. There's no answer to this. Such occasions compel the question, are Muslim majority countries in South Asia the only ones to have indulged in religious persecution? Are Muslim always the persecutors, never the persecuted? Anyway you parse this, and one thing is clear, the CAA's objective is to deny citizenship to Muslim refugees because they are Muslims. For this reason alone, the law cannot be defended on moral grounds. Besides the CAA being morally reprehensible, it is also plainly unconstitutional and violative of fundamental right to equality before the law enshrined in Article 14 of the Constitution. The constitutional protection requires that any kind of state classification, now this is a classification that these are the three countries and then these persons, refugees from these countries belonging to particular religion will be given citizenship. So this is a kind of a classification which is permitted under Article 14. So, but the law requires that any kind of state classification of persons must be reasonable and must have a rational and just object. But the CAA introduces a classification without any reasonable basis. Now CAA restricts the definition of persecuted minorities to non-Muslims. This is supposed to be on the supposition that since these three countries are Islamic states, there won't be any persecution of Muslims. That is so untrue, and it flies in the face of the ground realities, because Ahmadiyyas, Hazaras, Shias, all Muslim communities all remain persecuted in our neighborhood. Article 14 demands no arbitrariness in the state action. They say that if any action is found to be arbitrary, it would be vitiated. Any law which violates this principle would be declared null and void and declared unconstitutional. In 1973, the Supreme Court in E.P. Royappa versus State of Tamil Nadu, it's a very famous judgment which ultimately led to the judgment in Maneka Gandhi and many other judgments where this principle was crystallized by the Supreme Court. And I will read only a few lines from this judgment. Where an act is arbitrary, it is implicit, that is, where an act is the law, is arbitrary, it is implicit, or the executive action. Where it is arbitrary, it is implicit that it is unequal, both according to political logic and constitutional law, and is therefore violative of Article 14. Afghanistan has no place in if the law was to be based on what was originally British India. Afghanistan was not a part of British India. But if it is meant to all countries in, say, South Asia, then what about Myanmar, where Rohingya Muslims face ethnic cleansing and genocide? Now, even the International Court of Justice has said that it's a case of genocide, and they have asked Myanmar to stop, they protect Rohingyas. Or take Sri Lanka, where Tamils have been discriminated and persecuted for decades. If the law is only for jurisdiction with a state religion, then it conveniently ignores Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka is also a religious state. It is a Buddhist state. Finally, Article 14 requires that the state cannot treat people unequally for no reason. There has to be a rational justification for treating the people differently. But the CAA uses religion as the condition precedent to determine who is entitled to protection and who is not entitled to. As I said, that the very idea of citizenship, which is grounded in the Constitution, is one of shared identity. It's not about religion. I mean, it's first time the religion is introduced as a basis for citizenship. This defies the constitutional assurance contained in Article 14, and the CAA therefore susceptible to validation. I mean, much is spoken by Mr. Ram about secularism. I don't want to add to that. But remember that secularism is held to be a basic structure of the Constitution. And the basic structure of the Constitution is something that cannot be tampered with. That's the law laid down in Keshavananda Bharati's case. The government may claim that the NRC is disconnected from CAA. I mean, in some states they say, okay, we supported CAA, but we will not allow NRC in our state. but its link with the National Population Register or NPR has been well documented. There was a very fine article by Prashant Bhushan and Cheryl D'Souza in Indian Express. You don't get it here. It's the North India Indian Express. That lays out how the process of preparing the NPR is contained in the Citizenship Registration of Citizens and Issue of Identity Card Rules 2003. Under this, a local registrar can identify those whose citizenship is doubtful. A lowly officer, some registrar will say whether whose citizenship is doubtful, and then he sent them for further inquiry. The district magistrate prepares the local register of Indian citizens to be transferred to the National Register of Indian Citizens. The appellate authority will be surprised to know that the reference is by the district magistrate, and the appellate authority for those aggrieved by this exclusion is also the district magistrate. Mr. Bhushan further points out, under the Foreigner Tribunal's Amendment Order 2019, the power to refer a suspected foreigner to a tribunal has been delegated again to the district magistrates. These experiences are based on the finding of the People's Tribunal, as I told you that I was part of the jury. This is very problematic, this a foreigners tribunal which they want to set up all over the country. So this foreigners tribunal, they are already functioning. Its members have no judicial experience, and their reappointment depends on how many they declare as foreigners. You will be surprised to know that we got the registers in our hands, copies of the register, that so and so member of the tribunal has declared less number of people as foreigners, so need not be continued. If somebody has declared hundreds of people, he would be continued for the next year. It's a year-to-year appointment. The proceedings are so arbitrary, notices are rarely served. Can you imagine that in that NRC exercise which was carried in Assam, nearly 60% of persons have been declared foreigners through ex parte orders. Notices not served. So since notice is not served, they have not appeared, so they are declared as foreigners. Now what is the effect? They would be sent to these detention centers with extremely inhuman conditions. And this all depends on your luck. So do you have a record, I mean, with certain names, etc., father's name is, say, I'm taking a Muslim case, I mean, say his name is Ali Khan, and there is a spelling mistake somewhere. So the foreigners tribunal would reject it. They would say that he is to be sent to referred to the detention center, whereas his brother or his sister might be with the same document but with the correct name might be accepted as in the list of the citizens. So those who suffer, remember, in this exercise are the poorest, those who are marginalized. And what about, just imagine this, in this country, I mean, many parts are devastated by floods, by other natural calamities. People have lost not their only life saving or their everything, but they also lost crucial documents. Where from they are going to produce these documents? There are lakhs of people. Take the case of tsunami, in what happened, in which Tamil Nadu was also affected by that. So how these people are going to prove their citizenship? So this is the effect of this CAA, NRC, and the NPR. Of course, I mean, there is a very positive twist to the whole story, and Mr. Ram spoke about it so eloquently. It's this is the first time even I have seen the people, especially the youth in this country, rising up against this very repressive regime. I also presided over in a tribunal about the UP violence against the protesters. I mean, it's unimaginable what police did in UP against against the protesters. Many of the protests were completely peaceful. So the atrocities which were committed by the police, and the most mainly the chief minister, he spoke before the press that he is going to take revenge. Badla lena hai. Can you imagine a chief minister is declaring a war against his own people? And then what happened in thereafter in UP is a disaster. The government is trying its hardest to silence the people. The people, I mean, the police are permitted now to do anything. Why? Jamia, also the Aligarh University, and many places in UP. What happened in JNU, of course, you know, all of you know that. Then you can arrest the people, destroy the vehicles of the people, the entering private spaces, homes. But the people are standing up against this. And another thing which you will notice, we had secularism was a very academic subject, which was talked about only in seminars, in court halls, and meant for very limited number of people. And you see people reading preamble of the Constitution, they are talking, they're really, I have never seen secularism being discussed or being supported in such a big way in the country. Now, what the government is doing is labeling the country as anti-national, anti-Hindu, anti-democratic. This is their usual tool of othering. This government, I believe, is in the search of an enemy every day. So there are liberals, leftists, students, press. Not all. Most of the press is today pliant, but press like Hindu and the others, they are all enemies. But they don't understand that there's something exists in their heads. The leadership forgets that it is their duty to govern rather than being an agency whose role is to gather and pander to vote banks and indulge in identity-based politicking. Look at the language used by the Home Minister. What is this Tukade gang? Is he talking about, he's talking about our own students. So the whole university is Tukade gang. The whole, whosoever is protesting against the CAA, whosoever is opposing, is a part of that anti-national or Tukade gang. And this is promptly, I find it, this is the ministers, their followers, they are parroting these words. This Tukade gang, practically I hear it every day. So, this is not how democracies work. You cannot label, the protesters as anti-nationals. See, there is and when it is acknowledged that the right to protest is a constitutional right, and what kind of, some of the celebrities, I just really felt so shocked that a movie actress went to and just a gesture to support a student leader who was assaulted. And what is what they are talking about? They say that all these people should be exiled from India. They should be sent, and preferably the language is that you go to Pakistan. Why? Somebody asked that why not to Scotland? So I don't know what this language is, but this is completely irrational. So one thing I'm certain of that people must come together and fight against this irrational, immoral, and unconstitutional law. And to that end, I fully support the ongoing protest. Eventually, I can only hope better sense prevails. And lastly, about the judiciary. I've written about it. I mean, I said that they're known to falter against a powerful executive. This has happened in emergency, and when they said that that they have a diamond pride and diamond hard hope that the state will take care of all the detainees, and one judge used the word motherly care. So all this is proved to be completely wrong. What happened in the emergencies now has come out. So the other thing which I'm really worried, and I wrote about it, that the prioritization. Ordinarily, the petitions were filed, I mean, when they were filed long back. Ordinarily, in urgent interim reliefs, I mean, the court gives early dates. So, seems to be the court is completely unmindful of what is happening in this country. And priorities, and I'm not saying that the Sabarimala is not an important issue, but today, is it important today? Is it a burning issue today? It might be at some stage. That's another subject to discuss, how this review is finally referred to 7 judges. But anyway, I will not go into that. But this really troubling that the court has no time for these very, very important issues which are affecting the lives of millions of people. So with this, as I said, I can only hope better sense prevails on all that power that might be. Thank you very much.
Request Usha Ramanathan, legal scholar, give us her perspective and also thinking on what needs to be done.
I know that this meeting is to help us understand what the law is about. So I'll kind of try and see what we've understood, because what is happening now has made us go back to what citizenship was, the various points in our independent history that the idea of citizenship has been changed. It's been amended in various kinds of ways. So I'll just try first set that out and say a few more things. The interesting thing that I found, the first thing that I found about our constitution and about our polity is that the first Citizenship Act came only in 1955. We had our first election before we had our Citizenship Act. So the idea of keeping it inclusive and keeping everybody within the system and seeing everyone who's here as being part of India has been there from the beginning, and it's been there for a very long time. It's only now being, it's being threatened now, but it's been there for a very long time. In the Constitution, see, when we were reading the Constituent Assembly debates and we were looking later at the 1955 Act, you realize that it was difficult to make a law on the Constitution and to settle the question when the Constitution was being made, because partition was still going on and nobody was sure what will happen, how will these populations settle, where will they go, how do you need to define this population. But one thing that they were clear about was that they were not going, India was not going to have a constitution that would be based on religion. It is not going, in the sense it's not going to have citizenship based on religion. That much was clear. It was about who stays, who is here, who maybe has gone away to what became Pakistan and then needed to come back because they feel that they want to settle here and not settle in Pakistan. This is what they were dealing with at the time of the Constituent Assembly. In 55, when they brought in the law, and I'll stick with the one thing, there are various ways in which we can acquire citizenship here. But the significant thing for us at this point are two. One, citizenship by birth. Anyone up to 1987, anyone born in India was entitled to Indian citizenship. And they actually debated this quite a lot to see whether, if it was, like they said, if a Japanese is passing by and then the child is born here, will that child be entitled to citizenship? And ultimately they resolved this, that no, anyone born here will be entitled to citizenship. You can opt out of it whenever you want, but you have a right to citizenship when you're here. So it was an inclusive way of looking at this. And people who came in, the idea of naturalization. The idea of naturalization actually didn't have anything to do with legality or illegality. It had to do with people being here. And if they stayed here long enough and they became part of the polity, then you accepted the idea of naturalization and people could become citizens of this country. In we had of course, we've had the Assam Accord, and I think we should just pause for 1 minute to say that, you know, the reason that Assam is objecting to the Citizenship Amendment Act is different from why the rest of India is objecting to it. And we do need to show some sympathy for what's happened in Assam, because in Assam, in the 70s and 80s, their anxiety was that they were getting to be politically marginalized. So if you look at the amendment that came in 1985 after the Assam Accord, it's actually fascinating because they are in that amendment, the words that are used are words like undivided India. You're recognizing that there is a concept of undivided India and that this movement of population that was happening within this undivided India. And like Justice Shah said, Afghanistan really doesn't feature. It is, you know, it's Bangladesh and Pakistan, and because of the kind of conflict that was going on, it was much more to do with Bangladesh. And India was not rejecting this. So even when the Assam Accord came in and they had the law that was changed, they said that anyone who has come to this country before 1971 would be entitled. So if you've come here before 66, you're a citizen. If you've come between 66 and 71, then in Assam, you'll have to register with the government. Once you've registered with the government for a period of 10 years, you'll be entitled to everything other than a voting right. So including a passport. This is the way we changed, when we had to accommodate the kind of problems that people had, this is the way we changed it. In 86, the government was looking at the influx of, the influx is words that they use. I don't think it was an influx at all, as we can see from the kind of numbers that are emerging now. But that there were people coming into this country because of problems around us. So they said that especially from 3 countries, especially from, well, not 3 countries, but three geographical areas. One was Sri Lanka, one was Bangladesh, and the other, they said, from African countries. People were coming into India. And the legislators' concern was that is everyone, whoever comes here, they may be coming here because there's some difficulty in their countries and they may be going back at a certain time. So during that time, do we want to give citizenship to every person who was born here? So when they considered it, they said that, well, if the child who is born here, if either parent is Indian, then they can get Indian citizenship straight away. The idea of naturalization continued to exist and it could have been used for other people becoming citizens of this country. It is in 2003 that we start seeing the change, and I think we also need to ask why it is that we don't seem to pay attention to things till it becomes really bad. And then when it gets so bad, then we are fighting a battle with our backs to the wall, and then of course this time the backs are not to the wall, they are right in the center of the street. But I'm saying that we do need to watch for what's happening around us. In 2003, the Citizenship Act was amended and 2 things were introduced into it. 3 things actually. One, they brought in the idea of the National Register of Citizens. Now we do need to know where that came from. This came after the Kargil War, and there was a Subramaniam committee that was set up which was looking at intelligence failure. And in the context of that failure, they said, maybe if you can have an ID card that is given to people, especially in the coastal areas, and then you can extend it to, and border areas, and then you can extend it to other parts of India, that might make it possible to quickly identify whether a person belongs here or not. So that first idea of the ID card came in because they were talking, because they were talking about quick recognition because of militancy. And the target at that time was really Pakistan, because we had gone to war with them just before then. We had been at war with them. By 2003, that shifted. Somewhere the idea of militancy went off and we were talking about, we meaning as a country, the legislators parliamentarians were talking about Bangladeshi immigrants being our great threat. Now where that came in, I don't know, but with Justice Shah, I would say that we need to have the judiciary not merely do the work that it needs to do now, but also to undo the harm that they've done before. Because if you look at the decision that they gave in 2005 and 2007 and again in 2014, this movement of populations in this undivided India coming in from Bangladesh, moving around, this is called by the court external aggression. causing internal disturbance, both of which terms in the constitution can allow it to be treated as an emergency. And there was no evidence before them other than vague numbers that were thrown around and a governor's statement from Assam, who was himself a panicked man. I mean, I think panic should be treated by psychiatric treatment, not by the making of laws. So they adopted this and they said that this is external aggression. So if you have, people who are economic migrants and therefore they are moving, trying to get themselves some work wherever it is that they can go, that got recharacterized as external aggression and their presence as causing internal disturbance. This is not, this is based on judicial response to what they saw, but not based really on any evidence. So this is 2003. So you have the National Register of Citizens, which has come in for this. You also have the introduction of the idea of the OCI. So before I say that, they introduced the idea of the illegal migrant. So the law, the 2003 law, says that, and they changed the idea of who can be a citizen by birth. So if earlier you could be a citizen by birth up to 87, if you were born here, after that, till 2003, till 2004, if either of your parents was a legal, if they were an Indian citizen, from 2003, after the amendment which was brought into effect in 2004, if either parent is an illegal migrant, then the child doesn't get citizenship. This is extraordinary because what we are essentially saying is that if I am an Indian citizen and I have a child, but my spouse or my partner is declared to be illegal at any time, the child loses citizenship. So when we are talking about the changes that are coming in through this law, we need to remember that this is not only about saying that Muslims are going to be declared as illegal citizens now. It's saying generations of people cannot be legal in this country. And that's a very serious statement to make. And it's not only generations to come, it will also declare people who've been there earlier as illegal because one person in that family is being declared to be illegal. It's a very serious thing that happened. And the third thing, of course, was the OCI. I find it fascinating that at the same time that you had the illegal migrant and exclusion being brought in, people who had opted to get citizenship in other countries, if their fathers or whatever parents or grandparents had moved out, but you were from India originally, then you would have a special status in this country and get everything other than fundamentally passport, because we don't accept dual citizenship, and voting rights, because only citizens are entitled to vote. But all others would be permitted. This has also become important now, and I'll leap to that and come back to the rest, because I think this is something that's not being recognized. We are seeing there are many people who are very complacent because they think it's not going to affect them. And I understand that complacency. Not everyone feels, it shakes you up when you have to deal with a situation like this. So those who find it difficult to deal with it would be tempted to retreat. But I think if we read the Citizenship Amendment Act carefully, we'll know that most people, maybe most people in this room and many people beyond, will find that they can't actually be as sanguine as all that. Because the Citizenship Amendment Act also has a clause, this 2019 one has a provision, where they say that they have taken on they've made the cancelling of the OCI an executive decision. And earlier it used to be, the kind of things for which you could cancel an OCI was like serious offences. Although they did have, if you threaten the integrity of India and whatever, but it could still be judicially challenged. It was not just an executive process, and it was about treason and about fraud. But it did not say, anything that is an offence in this country. For instance, today, in fact in UP, we are in a strange situation, I don't know how to react to this, where the Chief Minister says that Azadi is a seditious word. So if people are going to talk freedom and that becomes a seditious word, then the idea that you can cancel an OCI and there is nothing that the person can do about it, I think we need to pause a little bit. All it needs is a tweet which says, I don't like what this government is doing, and that's enough for them to cancel it. And who will you be fighting? You'll be fighting the Indian state when you're sitting somewhere else. I think and once a person's OCI is cancelled, it's not like it's going to, you walk into the embassy and you get yourself a visa and come. What does it mean? What does this mean? In fact, to me, this provision explains much more what this government wants than even the other provisions. And the reason is this. There is a utopia. And I have to confess that I think all utopias are bad. Because every utopia oppresses somebody or the other. And I don't think we should encourage the idea of utopia. But here we are talking about a utopia where the kind of people that I want will be the only people who will be here. And I should be allowed to decide who can be here, who I will allow into the country. Priya Pillai won't be let out, so you can't go out if you don't want to go, if you want to go. And you can't come into the country because we will control that. So the idea that there are certain rights that are given to you where you can move freely, where you can come and go, where you belong. That idea of belonging is being taken over by executive power and control. And I really think we need to spend some time trying to understand what this is. So that's the kind of changes that we've had. The second thing is this connection between NPR and NRC. Actually, the government keeps saying that NPR will not lead to the NRC and that the NPR has nothing to do with the NRC. Actually, if that is true, then the NPR is an illegal exercise. There is no law other than the Citizenship Act that allows for an NPR or for a collection of this kind of data. No law exists. So if it is not under the Citizenship Act, this exercise cannot be allowed to carry on because there is no authority of law at all. If it is under the NRC, then it's a debate that's been happening over a period of time because I've been working sometimes, when I wonder if when all you have is a hammer, all you see is a nail. But I find that the UID is right at the center of all of this. And I've discussed it with many people before saying it here so that it's not like I'm getting obsessed with, with Aadhaar as you call it and UID as I call it as being the chief villain. It has been, and I'm now convinced that even people who are not particularly obsessed believe that what I'm saying is right. So I'll say it now after all these caveats. That the UID was started as a mission mode project. And the National Population Register was a project that was going to be done simultaneously with the UID. When the UIDAI was set up, they said that what they are going to do is to standardize all databases, and the exercise with which they would be doing it in conjunction would be the National Population Register. Very recently, some of you may have seen it, there's been a Twitter thread going around where one of the talks that Mr. Nilekani has been giving, and I think that was in 2018, where he says, there was this National Population Register. Somebody asked him a question about that, and he says, yes, there was this National Population Register. And we were, of course, in competition because the same turf, right? So we were in competition, and then, we kind of made our own arrangements. If you go back and look at what has happened on National Population Register, one of the most stunning things, and this was taken to the court, but the court, of course, never decided it, is this, that the Registrar General of India was a registrar for the UIDAI. He was collecting information and handing it over to the UIDAI, which was then supporting them by saying, we will do your biometric work for you and let's share this data. So today when the Home Minister says that, this is completely useless, it's a question about what the rest of the NPR that has been going on is. I mean, is that useless too? Should that be thrown out too? And what is this collusion and collaboration between these two entities that has been going on? Because if we look at what's been happening to us, I know one of the things that's been happening, every time there is a policy change, we have to stand in queues. But there is also this, that every time we get data-based. And if you look, Mr. Ram was just showing us the list of things that that they are asking for now. Any way in which you can have an ID, any way, all of it they want to aggregate and collect in this. None of it, according to them, establishes your citizenship. Then why do they want it? Yeah, he's got the list here. Among the documents that they are talking about, they say Aadhaar number, ration card number, mobile number, passport number, voter ID number, PAN number, driving license number. And in case they've forgotten anything, you're allowed to add it, I suppose. So this idea that any way in which you can be identified in anywhere you are, you have to give it and hand it over to this database, he says, is an extraordinary thing. It has nothing to do with citizenship, but it does have to do with something that we've been talking about. You know, Ritika is here, she's done a lot of this too, talking about in terms of what the UID does and what the UID helps other people do by putting it in multiple databases. And that we call civil debt. So once you've collected, the other thing is, you know, this hum kagaz nahi dikhayenge, I think we need to, you know, look at that again a little bit. Now the government tells us you don't need to give us documents. Just put your information on this. We don't want you to show us any documents. And the reason is this, they are not interested in everybody's documents. They will decide whose documents they want to verify. And those people's documents will have to match. And then they have, also remember, this is an executive exercise. So even in Assam, there were people who produced documents where they said, we don't accept this. So it's an extraordinary executive power that people have, that the state is, you know, that the government is giving to itself to decide who they will ask documents for. So this business that you don't have to give documents, please don't get carried away by it. It doesn't mean anything. And like Justice Shah was saying, it is true that in the rules that have been made under the Citizenship Act, there they say that the person who's coming to get your information from you will look at you and decide whether you look like a doubtful citizen. And then if you're doubtful, then they'll mark D against you. Then anybody in the neighborhood, so then they'll put out that whole list in the, you know, in the local area, and then anybody can go and look at that and say, no, this one is not citizen. That person, so you put in a complaint saying, no, this person is not citizen, and I think now they've got a limit on how many people you can say no to. So then you have to go and establish after that you are in fact a citizen. So the whole onus shifts to the person who they decide to ask this question of. And that's why this idea of secularism and the idea that we have to exist as one community or break ourselves up into multiple bits becomes extremely significant. It may not be me today. It may be. You know, just to be fair, they might also have a number of Hindus who are on it and then ask questions. Some of them might be able to establish themselves and some may not. So we need to remember this. A couple of other things. One, I was talking to Justice Sawant before I came here because I said there is a meeting and he's been writing a lot and talking a lot about this. And I said, is there anything you want us to discuss? And he said, I think it is important for us to ask who actually was responsible for the partition of India. And they'll keep talking about whether it's Nehru or it is Jinnah or it's over. He said, actually, that's not true. It is, if you look at basically how did people move religion? Why did people move religion? Because of the oppression of the Hindu religion, of the practice of Hindu religion, which is there directly in its caste system. So he said, you can't discuss citizenship without discussing caste. You can't discuss partition without discussing caste. And then, of course, he had one little thing on the side and he said, so there are all these Aryans who've come in from here, when are they leaving? So that's a separate question I think we need to ask. But he had, when we were discussing this, the question, there are two things that are going to happen simultaneously. One is we're going to have the census, and then we're also going to have this national population register. So the question that's often asked is, how do we answer these questions? How much do we need to say? Is it enough not to give all our ID documents? Can we give the rest? Can we just register ourselves? We made the same mistake when we did UID. I'm not even going to go into telling you the story of what's been happening, because it's been happening on the ground where none of us is. We are at a slightly elevated level. We've not seen what the pain of that process is. Occasionally we read about people dying in Jharkhand or dying somewhere, and then it becomes a story which passes on. But that's a different story. But here, see, the census is taken so that there can be planned development for the next 10 years. Broadly, for a state to know who are the people, what do they need, what are the kinds of, what is it that we need to develop in this period. The government has said that they want to do the NPR along with the census because the census is confidential and the NPR is not confidential. So they want the same information to be collected in both, and although it is confidential, like we know with the UID database, government controls it. So his suggestion to that was, he said, this is a country which was taught non-cooperation. We shouldn't non-cooperate, we shouldn't be uncooperative if what the government is doing is right. This is not about troublemaking. But he said governments can be wrong. And if we find as a people, the government represents us. The government is not a power over us. So if we find that the government is wrong, maybe it's making a mistake. Maybe it just doesn't get it. Maybe it's been thinking in a certain way for so long that it doesn't know how to think otherwise. In which case, our job becomes to tell the government that it's wrong and that we are not going to be a part of what this is. I love Rousseau's line on this where he says, obedience is not the duty of a citizen. Actually, obedience is abdication of our responsibility. So his suggestion was that non-cooperation, which we've learned here, and it's a good time because it's 150 years since Gandhiji, that we shouldn't forget why we do non-cooperation. We do it because it is unfair, unjust, illegal, immoral, and we do not allow our state to become that. So we just recast what we are saying in this. And just one last word before I move away. It's this that, I'm always scared to say anything theoretical in whatever I'm going to say it. So this is this idea of eminent domain. For many people who've worked here and who've seen land acquisition and development processes, we know that eminent domain has been the way through which the state over a period of time has started asserting that all land belongs with the state. We can keep it till the state wants it. We found that happened with land, then that happened with water, that happened with mineral resources. Then it began to happen with forests. It's been happening for a long time. Then it's come to our money, which we saw when they said, if you don't do this, we'll take your money away. Now there are bills which are pending which says that we might have to bail out banks and it will be done without our, it's not about our consent. Legally, we'll be made to do this. And now we are being told, since the UID started, we've been told that we belong to the state and we have to do what the state, whatever we have belongs with the state, including our data, including our biometrics, it belongs with the state. I think that politics has changed in a way which we need to recast it. We don't belong with the state. The state owes us an obligation and a responsibility. We don't owe the state that. And the very last thing, that they are also talking about collecting biometrics. I won't go into any length on this, but biometrics is a sham. And I can show you chapter and verse from documents that the UIDAI itself has produced, which is why, and I'll just tell you the last thing that they have done. They're talking about one nation, one ration, and they say they're going to use the UID and they're going to use biometrics. And then they say, but some people biometrics doesn't work, so we will allow them to have a nominee. So I nominate somebody else to give their biometrics for me. And who are these people? They say if you're a single member family, then your biometrics, if it doesn't work, it's a problem for you. If a family has above 60, above 70, above 60, below 15, disabled, with blindness, then biometrics may not work for you, so okay, you can appoint a nominee. If it's a member, 4 people in a family and none of their biometrics work, then you can have a nominee. So basically, there have been admissions and admissions and admissions all around us that biometrics don't work. Why is it important? Because today, if they make biometrics the basis of establishing our identity in relation to citizenship, in a few years, even for those who've been able to give their biometrics, it will start changing. And the control over deciding whether we are citizens or not continues to vest with the state. And we never get free of this. So let's just think about we do need the larger politics is perfectly clear. But how is that larger politics being worked out and what do we need to do in each of those? If we can think a little bit about that. Thank you.
Rohini Mohan, she'll speak on the procedure, and one question I'd like to pose, in case she wants to comment on it, is the role of corruption in this procedure. Because sometimes when communalism and corruption contend, it is not inconceivable that corruption will trump in individual cases communalism. In other words, in doing this procedure, have you come across, in Assam, in Northeast, have you come across significant corruption? Sorry.
lights down. The light konchirunga. And the light cut to yeah,
I'm coming in because there's been already a lot of understanding that we would have got from the legal perspective, from the larger questions of what is citizenship. What I'm going to talk about is based on field reporting that I have done over the last 2 years in Assam. And especially starting from, my physical presence in Assam started from 2018 when I went to report on how the National Register of Citizens was functioning there. And I'd like you to think of this as, in some ways, a pilot case of what it might look like if the NRC comes in the rest of the country. So at the time that the NRC began in Assam, there was no talk of it going nationwide. It was supposed to be a uniquely Assamese exercise. It was supposed to be an exercise that is going to solve and address years, decades of resentment, fear, anxiety, and polarization. And I'll tell you a little bit about the process based on the stories of people that I encountered, people who have shown procedurally everything that they've tried to establish their citizenship. One of the first families that I met was of Shahnawaz, and he's the guy in the green t-shirt. And he lives in a district called Barpeta in Assam, which is a predominantly Bengali Muslim district. There are other communities living there, but every time you mention this Barpeta, the response of an Assamese is, the perception, it's a stereotype that it is largely, it's full of river islands, it's full of Bengali speaking Muslims across class. This family, the elderly gentleman sitting on the ground is Shahnawaz's father, who was a panchayat president at some point. The man who's standing next to him has had at that time just written the police entrance exam, and he was going to join. The mother has been an Anganwadi worker earlier, and now she's a homemaker. There's another brother who runs a pharmacy, another brother who runs a grocery shop, two women, two sisters, one of whom was a school teacher in a primary school, another daughter who got married and moved to a different village. And when I went to their house, what was important to them was, first, they said, let me show you evidence of who I am. Even before I asked a question, there was some chai offered, they put a plastic table out in the middle of the courtyard, and they brought out all their documents. And what you're seeing here, this yellowing paper, is a land document from 1936, which the family has. And it's remarkable that they've kept it in whatever state it is in. They've kept it. They also had, one of them had a passport, two of them had graduation certificates. I think two of them had birth certificates. All of them had school-going certificates and admission cards. And then this main land document, which they, if you have a 1936 document in which the writing itself is of a British official, you've shown that you've lived in that place for a while now. And the land is still being tilled by one of their family members. And still, despite this array of documents that were there in different files in their house, they were petrified of losing their citizenship. And this is because of the context in which this process was happening. And I'll quickly go through it. All of them mentioned a little bit about the background in Assam. I won't go in depth into it, but just to establish that in the 60s and 70s, there was massive violence against the latest group of immigrants in Assam. It's a region that has seen Bengal, Assam, the Northeast has seen so much migration for centuries. Even communities that see themselves as indigenous today and claim indigeneity are people who have at some point come from somewhere else. There are some groups that are that can't establish a migration pattern, but most people today will say that they at some point had come from somewhere else, from Burma, from China, some parts of China, and then the most recent wave of immigrants or migrants were Bengali-speaking people from either from Bengal, what was Bengal, then it became East Pakistan, then it became Bangladesh, and all of these people that came in over time started to be seen as politically threatening for the Assamese speakers and the local tribal groups, because they felt like there were some groups, and actually the dominant Bengali speakers were Hindus in those parts, and they had a language movement, and there were several of them who were top, who at the time were prime ministers, the chief ministers were called prime ministers then. So there was a fear about that. And the Assamese agitation that started at the time was against these people who were seen as outsiders. And all of those protests and demonstrations that happened were not all peaceful. There were villages that were burnt, there were people who were just stopped off the street, asked to show papers, rickshaw pullers who were asked to prove that they're citizens. There was a kind of picture of who this immigrant is. And this is a news report from that time, 1983, in a place called Nelly, where in a single morning of February, there were 3,000 people massacred. And this was because they were all suspected to be Bangladeshi-speaking Muslims who had come from outside. Over the years, it's quite clear now, as people remember what happened then, it's quite clear that there was no proof that they were immigrants of any kind. And then to end the violence after this horrific morning, after that there was conversation between there was an accord that was signed by the Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, and the leader of the All Assam Students Union, which was at the forefront of this anti-outsider agitation, and the leader of the Assam government at the time, which was also an Assamese nationalist party. And they signed a document, an Assam Accord, and it's important to remember that this is where this is one of the places and the crucial place from where this deadline of 1971 comes in. It is also the accord that promises that locals would be original inhabitants, locals would, their culture, their language, and their identity would be preserved and protected over the years. But what has happened after this accord is signed is that a lot of this preservation and protection of this identity has become reduced to one solution, which is to throw out outsiders. There are several things that can happen, and this is different groups in the Northeast have asked for the mainland to pay attention to this for a long time, and but over the years this has not happened. What it has become reduced to is a silver bullet of throwing immigrants out, identifying and deporting, or just throwing out. And this, I found it fascinating that this was a picture. The photographer who came with me, a Delhi-based woman, and she had just come for the first time to Assam. I had been reporting there for a while. For one story when she came, I said, just take pictures. And she said she took this picture, and later when she was showing me, she said, do you think this is an illegal immigrant? And within a few days, she had already picked up that stereotype of what an illegal immigrant looks like. A lungi wearing, slightly bearded, scrawny, wearing, he's actually what the towel on his shoulder is actually an Assamese style towel, which is very dear to people in Assam, but they see that as blending in and disguise. So there were many ways in which outsiders were sought to be thrown out. And over the years, different governments under the BJP, under the Assamese Nationalist Party, the Assam Gana Parishad, and the Congress Party have all come up with different ways in which this can be done. I'll mention three of them. There was a border police set up, and unlike what the name suggests, they are not on the border. They are based in small police stations within villages which they feel have more migrants. It's already, the setup itself is biased. And these border policemen are supposed to just keep watching for people who might be foreigners. Then you have, they would file notices against you if they feel that you're a foreigner, and then you have to prove yourself to be a citizen in what is called the Foreigners Tribunal that Justice Shah also mentioned. And the Foreigners Tribunal, they were at the time, I think 16 or 15. Over the years, they've increased, they became 36. Most of the time that they've existed, they've been 36, and recently they are 100. They will soon be made into 1,100, is what the government says. So these Foreigners Tribunals is another process by which people, the government set up, saying that this is where you can go, and this is where you prove that you are a citizen and the onus is on you. You are guilty until you prove yourself innocent, a subversion of every other way in which we experience the law and the courts in the rest of the country. And then then another process was what is called the D-voters. Now it's become so close to home now, this D-voter and this doubtful citizen. So doubtful citizens were identified by election officers who went door to door, and they asked you to show papers, and if you didn't have sufficient papers then, they would mark a D against you in the electoral rolls. The idea was that within 10 years, because I think it was a naturalization idea, within 10 years that D would be removed and you could start voting again. During the time that D is on your on the electoral list against your name, you can't vote and you lose. I mean, of course, you can't contest elections and all of that. So how is a D determined? It could be determined by the border police accusing you or just informing the electoral officer. It can also be by some neighbor who thinks that you are an immigrant or doesn't like your face, or your wall is too high for him, whatever. It can be any reason, and they accuse you, and then the D can be put. It was supposed to have been done only twice over the last few decades, but many investigations have found, and there were two election officers who admitted to me that these were marked generally in between also, even when there wasn't a whole door-to-door campaign. They did mark it, and then you were stuck with it, because as we know, once something is on record, it's really hard to fix it. So people were just stuck with the D and had not been able to vote for a long time. And if you had a D, you also wouldn't make it to the NRC. So all these processes have been tried out, and yet people weren't satisfied. People felt that illegal immigrants are not being identified, they're not being deported. There were detention camps, that is the other one. Detention camps where everybody who doesn't make it through any of these processes will be put. Now there are 6 in Assam, there's a huge one coming up. It is, the NRC was thought to be the procedure to end all other procedures. The one solution that could maybe fix these years of bias, because over the years people admitted to themselves, have understood. So even those who are targeted felt that it was biased towards them. Even those who wanted these processes to identify immigrants felt that they were not doing a good job. Nobody was happy. So the NRC was widely accepted, and people were excited in Assam that finally a bloodless process, untouched by human hands, entirely technological, would solve this issue. And that's where the NRC started in 2015. Every single person who lived in Assam would have to apply if you wanted to be recorded as a citizen, and you show papers. So let me now quickly tell you how it happens. So how does the NRC work? There are, what we know now, we are worried about our documents, but there's a process, and even if it may be slightly different for the nationwide NRC, the basic idea of how you prove that you are a citizen based on paperwork would remain the same, I think. So the NRC in Assam had asked you to produce 2 sets of documents. One is called the List A, where you present proof that somebody in your family, an ancestor, lived in India before 1971, lived in Assam before 1971. The cutoff for Assam was 1971 when Bangladesh was created. So if you could prove, and there are riders to that, I'm just telling you the simple procedure. So if you can show that you lived there, so either a birth certificate of your grandfather or a land document like Shanavaz's family had, something to establish you were somebody in your family was physically there in that place and had roots in the area. Then the second set of documents, this is not enough, you'd think this is enough. Second set of documents is where the massive chaos comes from. Those List B documents are where you show documents that connect you to that ancestor whose paper you're showing. That ancestor is called the legacy person, from whom you draw your legacy. It can actually be a man or a woman, but in practice in Assam, it was largely people had submitted documents of male ancestors, also largely because it was men who were more likely to have documents, but you could present documents of anybody. And the List B documents are where everybody in the family who is related to that legacy person produces their own set of documents which establish linkage. So to establish linkage, if I have to establish linkage to my grandfather, I have to show my birth certificate, or there's a list of documents that can be accepted. Some are not accepted. Ration cards are not accepted. Although they have all the names of everybody in the ration card, they're not accepted. If I have to show connection to my grandfather, I have to produce documents that say, okay, Rohini Mohan, and father's name, my father's name would be there. Then, in addition, just my documents, I have to also submit my father's documents, which say that my father's name is this. In just these 3 documents, you can imagine the number of mistakes that can happen. These sets of, my father has 5 types of names in his documents. And as I reported in Assam, I did come back and ask all of my family members to show me their documents. It can become something that, first of all, I didn't have to ever until then question what is a citizen. Why am I a citizen? Like, how did I become a citizen? And I used to think it is by birth because maybe American understanding of what is citizenship. I thought it was by birth, but it was at some point in India. It is no more. And it is largely by ancestry. I am born before 87, so I could say that, I'm born here, so it's fine. But I still have to prove that I don't have any, the rest of the people who are younger than me, like my sister, have to prove that they don't have any illegal parents. So in all of this, when we submit documents, it could go wrong in a million ways, and it did, and that's what I saw in Assam. This family, they are a Hindu family, Bengali speakers, they're the Aryas, and they had what is happening here is a sudden panic when they realized that the legacy person's land document, which is their great-grandfather's document, is missing, which was the land document. They had it, they'd seen it that morning, they knew I was coming to their house, so they found it, but there are 5 brothers who use that land document. Right, and they didn't have it. They went to the revenue office and got those land documents for themselves. They'd already spent quite a lot of money to make these documents ready. And we also have to know that Assam, because of the legacy, because of the history of persecution and questions that whoever was seen as outsiders was asked, people did keep documents. Because anyone on the road can ask you if you're a foreigner, and they kept more documents than the rest of the country, I feel, has. So they had this, and then suddenly there was this panic, they couldn't find it. It was for me a heartbreaking moment to witness. As they felt that they could imagine their entire family's citizenship and entire family's existence being in question because something went missing. They did find it, and then they, as families do, blamed each other. Then there is this other woman that I met called Delawara Begum. I'm telling you in ways in which, so you could miss a document, or maybe, I forgot to mention that one of the people who was in the 5 brothers that I showed earlier, they had a sister who they were not talking about, but later one of the women in the family told me that she had married outside the community, and if she came asking for the land documents, they would have to think about whether they will share it with her. And these are realities of how people live. So I don't know what happened to her, whether she was able to prove her citizenship or not. This is Delawara Begum. Delawara Begum is what she's holding up is what is called a Gaon Bura certificate or a Panchayat head certificate. And this is Gaon Bura, who's a community head and not necessarily that a person who is elected as an elected as a Panchayat head or a Sarpanch. This is a community head who is supposed to have kept birth and death records in registers, and they do it, I think, for a small honorarium, and they report to the district collector. And this is a kind of a community leader position. And because there were so many women, I think she's around 60, about to be 60, there were so many women who got married before they turned 18 and had never gone to school. And this is true of all of India, right? Especially people from some decades ago. The women did not exist on paper anywhere. The first time they turned up in any government record was when they voted for the first time, and then they turned up in the records with their husband's name, right? W/O, wife of somebody. And your husband is pretty useless in the citizenship records. You have to show ancestry. You have to show connection to your father or mother. And so what women like her would do, were allowed to do by the NRC, they saw that this was a problem and they came up with a solution, which is that you would go to the family, the Gaon Bura or the Sarpanch of the village from where you were born or you lived most of your life, who will give you a certificate saying, yes, I know Delora, she is the daughter of X, she has grown up here, I know her, I certify her to be a resident of this village. Then she also gets a similar certificate from the village that she lives in currently with her husband or family, and he gives a document, that Sarpanch gives a similar certificate saying, yes, when she got married on this year, and usually if it's a mosque, they have a record, a nikah record, so then maybe if that's where they got married, they'll have the date of marriage, if all these records exist. And then these two documents from the birth village and the village you live in after being married into a family, these two documents you could show as proof of you having lived in these places, because they didn't have any other documents. What happened under the NRC is that a few months before a list came out of the people that it included as citizens, the NRC head said, he passed a memo saying that such documents were widely being faked and these are weak. And immediately at that time, in that draft list, 54% of, I think it was 54 or 63, I forget the number, but a large number, more than 50% of the women who got excluded in that list were excluded because they gave this document. Their name was just set aside, they stopped accepting it. And then this was reversed a little bit by the Supreme Court, but had already this document becomes tainted. Now they can't give any other documents. And most women did give only this. Many women also submitted this along with other documents, thinking it just, ek aur de dete hain. Like let's just give one more to bolster my case. Even theirs was set aside because they were seen as presenting fake documents. Then there are other people who didn't get into the NRC, who were excluded from the NRC because they were flood victims. What you're seeing here is a relief eligibility certificate, which is given to you. This was from a great flood, I think 3-4 decades ago, where the whole village was washed out, and the government gave you some compensation, and they gave you the certificate, which made you eligible to collect some money from the government, or some you get some money to build a house or to retail your land, and people live, we know of Assam, maybe before all this fiasco, we know of Assam as a place that has seen so much flooding. It happened twice a year minimum, it floods there. And also a lot of these families, a lot of communities in Assam live alongside or inside the Brahmaputra, which is an extremely volatile river that that changes course a lot, and river islands come up, then they disappear. There were families that I met who said that they were kind of on the border, they lived on an island, and around the time of the 60s, they found themselves inside what is now India, because the river island just shifted. And they were on the other side of the border just by doing nothing. They never moved house, they lived in small huts. So this is the reality, and a lot of the people who did not get into the NRC were those who were flood victims. It might seem like the worst affected are people who are the poorest or the least most illiterate, or women, or the disabled, landless. But actually there were a lot of people who are people like us sitting in this room who also did not make the NRC, and you don't hear about them as much because they don't allow you to interview them and write their story in the newspaper, because they are hoping to use other methods, whether it is money or influence or just siding with somebody in the government to get themselves into the NRC. So you don't hear as much about their stories, but there have been a few brave people who have spoken up because they've seen that this is not going to work out. Some of those, this is a former army officer, a soldier, and an Air Force soldier. They are cousins. Both of them did not make it. There were well-to-do academicians, journalists who did not make it because they had studied in Kolkata, and they submitted, one of them, I'm telling you a real case, because he'd submitted a Kolkata certificate of graduation. And suddenly, at some point, they were not accepting that. And then you're just stuck with that. Children below the age of 10 who had no papers, or there were twins that I met, one of whom made it and another didn't. Then this entire village that didn't make it to the NRC. There was this, I went to meet one of the women there in the orange sari in the middle, and as I was talking to her, everyone turned up from the village, grandmother, everybody, and the humiliation that they were describing of being struck off the rolls, and suddenly you question who you are. It doesn't matter to you whether you're a citizen or an Indian or whatever until then. It matters to you, you know, ma hu, behen hu, beti hu and all. That's how people usually talk of their identity, right? Or, you know, I'm whatever, based on what I do, I'm a farmer or I'm a teacher or whatever. Suddenly now you're supposed to think about an identity first of all you never thought about, and then secondly are losing it overnight for things you don't fully understand. I'm showing you this family again because what NRC was supposed to be was to be the process that ends all other processes that were clearly seen as being biased and problematic and not working to help anybody who wanted that process even. But the NRC, what's done then is it's not a clean slate process. It is tainted by all those other processes that existed before. For example, anyone who faces trial in the Foreigners Tribunal is not even processed in the NRC. You can apply, but your application is not processed because you are under a different process, and then later on there were petitions were filed in the Supreme Court asking which is it the NRC that is greater or the Foreigners Tribunal, and now it is clear that it is the Foreigners Tribunal. Their judgment is greater. So this family didn't make it to the NRC, this family did not make it to the NRC because some of them did not, some of them were declared foreigners, or one of them was facing trial in the Foreigners Tribunal, and therefore the siblings also were under doubt. Because if one of you is suspected to be a foreigner, then maybe your brother also is, your ancestor is suspected. So even all your siblings are suspected. And this reason was not given to them. It was when they went and asked again and again for why they have not been included in the NRC, this was what they were told. So I will quickly get into this. Foreigners Tribunals are one of the most opaque, or not one of the most, the most opaque, arbitrary processes that I have ever seen. And earlier, when trying to describe it in articles, you would say a quasi-judicial process, but judicial is just a stretch. This is not really, the setup is like that, the people behave like that, there are lawyers involved, the documents you submit, but in every way, as Justice Shah said, it is biased and arbitrary and opaque. So because it was so opaque and the press was not allowed to sit in on hearings in the Foreigners Tribunal, but you kept hearing about how biased it was. The press was not allowed to sit in on those trials on the hearings because of some reporting in the past that showed that it was a humiliating process. Only the accused was asked to remove his chappals and enter. There was some reporting done on that, and then of course then they stopped taking anybody to sit in on the trials. So Foreigners Tribunals are where you go. The way the Foreigners Tribunal is connected to the NRC is that even now, everybody, those 19 lakh people or 1.9 million people who have been excluded from the NRC will all now face the Foreigners Tribunals. So they will have to again prove. This time they can bring some witnesses if they want. That's the only difference. But you have to bring in more documents. You have to give a written statement. And what is a written statement? Your life. And some of those written statements which are written by lawyers, by talking to somebody, is that, okay, tell me who you are. And this is a kind of exercise that should be enjoyable, but it is not, because you are going to start, you don't know where to start. And then you say, okay, when were you born? Many people don't know the year, birth date. So they kind of back calculate from when they got married, when they had their children, when their brother was born or sister was born, and they back calculate like that. But many of those people don't remember dates. So some smart lawyers would say, okay, when was there during the time of the Great Flood, who was the Chief Minister, who was the Prime Minister? So if you remember that, then you kind of know when you were living and when you were born or when you got married, and that would be included. But the court doesn't accept, like it was during the Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, you'll have to say this is the range in which she might have been born. So the Foreigners Tribunals were so opaque that I thought, okay, let me see if there is a way to find out if there is a pattern of bias. Maybe we are all panicking and maybe there is no bias. Maybe there are that many illegal immigrants. So I filed, okay, this is just a flow chart I had to draw for myself because I couldn't figure out the process until I did this for myself. It's so, everything leads to the detention camp. But there are so many processes that are interconnected that I just kind of drew a flowchart for myself and for all my editors that would keep asking questions on how it works. So then, so these are quick pictures of the foreigners' tribunals that I took from inside and outside on my phone. This is one of them. You know, you could be proud of ramshackle courts if they functioned well. You know, it doesn't have to be a palatial kind of building, but these are not. This is a gym inside which there is one court tribunal. This is the second floor of this shopping complex with the mobile repair shop at the bottom. This is the foreigners' tribunal. And these are the kind of judgments that are given, the verdicts, whether you're a foreigner or not. When you're accused of being a foreigner, how it happens is the border police accuses you, you get a notice, you get a date from the foreigners' tribunal where they ask you to come to court. And there you have to then prove that you are not a foreigner. So the verdict will not say that you are Indian. It will say you are not a foreigner or you are a foreigner. So that's how people would say. Everybody in Assam says, hum declared hain, hum declared nahi hain. And that's all. Everyone knows what this lingo means. I filed RTIs asking all 100 foreigners tribunals to give me 6 months of their verdicts. So 100 foreigners tribunals exist, not in all districts. And I wanted to analyze these documents, these verdicts, to see if there was a pattern of bias. And it was until then just based on testimonies of people who you already don't want to believe. The poor, the ones who you feel like, oh, if they're accused to be foreigners, something they must have done, right? So nobody trusts their word. So maybe paperwork, the rest of the country might believe it. So these RTIs, most of them were rejected because it wasn't even clear who is in charge of these documents. It was, they don't have a public information officer. That itself is a violation. It is not clear whether it's the Ministry of Home Affairs in Assam, or it is the border police, or it is the district collectorate. So the documents that I got 515 verdicts, and I analyzed them, and these came from people simply doing their job and didn't even realize, they just replied to the RTI. And these were, looking at this, these were verdicts from 5 courts. And what I found was that fear that I had, that if I had to submit my father's documents, all the spelling mistakes, that was rampant. And you'll see here, this was one of the first few I saw, Badr Ali and Badruddin. Some documents say Badr Ali, some documents say Badruddin. There are officials who are sitting in the in any government who sometimes, if they are not Muslim, they don't know that surnames don't necessarily have to pass from generation. Your father's surname doesn't have to be you know, your son's surname. You may not have a surname. Like South Indians, we realize that we don't necessarily have surnames, but there is confusion about what it should be. Some people just add Uddin, ha theek hai, you can put Uddin, because people, it's just a you know, a suffix that people just add on. It doesn't matter. Some people who go to the Hajj then add the name Haji. They're known as Haji in the village. And then, you know, somebody goes with them to the official and then he asks, what's his name? Then he says, Haji Badr Ali, and they'll write Haji Badr Ali. Now he has to prove that he's Haji Badr Ali from birth. So there was so much of, so many people were declared foreigners based on clerical errors like this, which they had no control over. And these are quick this quick data is that 82% of the orders that I analyzed, 82% of those trials were declared foreigners. People were declared foreigners. That's a huge number. I met individually 113 people. From the document, you can't, it's a narrative judgment, you can't tell what language they speak. So but one knows from the lawyers and from what they've said, where they come from and all of that they're probably Bengali speaking, but I wanted to be sure. I met 113 individually and all of them were Bengali speakers, because this was accused of Assamese feeling that outsiders and foreigners are all Bengali. I wanted to see if that was showing, that bias was showing in the system. Then 89% of the cases that I looked at were against Muslims. And 9 out of 10 Muslims who faced trial were declared foreigners. And 4 out of 10 were declared, Hindus were declared foreigners. And this is the shocking, for me, most shocking number, that 78% of those documents, those verdicts that I analyzed, were verdicts that were passed without the person even being tried. as Justice Shah said, the ex parte hearings, where they were not present, they probably did not know. Many of those people faced the same accusation twice. You have just finished proving that you're not a foreigner, you get another case again on you. Because who's filing it? Some neighbor, some who's accusing, who's kind of alleging that you're a foreigner and going to the police and saying that. That can repeat itself. So there's no double jeopardy. You can be accused as many times as the government wants. There's no end to it. And many people had two cases ongoing. This was a woman that I met who, when I met her, she did not even know that she had been declared a foreigner. And I, unfortunately, was the bearer of that news because I had the documents from the RTI. Because she felt that I'm already facing trial. What is this other case that has declared me a foreigner? Then this is the thing that Justice Shah mentioned, where people who are who are sitting at the Foreigners Tribunal head, they are called members because they are not judges. They could be people with no judicial experience at all today. Earlier they were supposed to be retired district judges and everything, but over the years that has been diluted. They could be lawyers with 3 years of experience at the time I was doing it, but now it can be any bureaucrat who doesn't have to have any judicial experience. What this is a performance appraisal of people who are sitting at the tribunal, the members who are on contract appointed by the Ministry of Home Affairs. And you can see here that I've marked, I don't know if you can see, but I've marked some of them red. Those are all people who were terminated because they declared less than 5 or less than 10% people foreigners. And to see a comparison, I did look at somebody who had declared, there's a blue line. So there this person has heard only 8% of the cases that came to him, but he declared over 40% of them foreigners, and he's been kept. He's only heard 8% of the cases. If we are looking at how efficient a person who is sitting at the Foreigners Tribunal is, for any of us, this would seem wrong. But everybody else, even if they've heard 60%, 50% of the cases that came to them, if they have declared just 5-6% of people foreigners, they were terminated. I'll quickly wind up, but we'll end with this family, which again is a Hindu family called Biswas, and the whole family was in detention camp for 9 years. And the children, the 2 girls who were here, were in detention camp, were taken when they were 3 and 5. When I met them in early 2019, they were teenagers. One of them was a teenager. She had never gone to school because she'd spent all her life inside jail. And the people who are under detention as foreigners do not have the rights even other prisoners who are convicted of murder or rape have. It's up to the jailer's benevolence whether they allow the children to go to school or what food comes to you, whether you can have visitors. None of this is confirmed. You have no rights once you are not a citizen of India. She's showing me here a picture of how old they were when they went into detention camp. And these are just kind of numbers of people who were declared foreigners since the 80s. Now there's talk of deportation. The difficulty with deportation is that the country that you're accused of coming from has to accept you to be from there. So Bangladesh, if you're also accused to be Bangladeshi, has to say that, yes, this person is on my records, so you can deport him here. But the reason why there are so many people in the detention camp is because you're not able, or so many people not even put in detention camp, is because there's no way to establish their linkage to the other country. So I won't get into perceptions and stuff. This is just to show that if you hear anywhere 50 lakh illegal immigrants exist in this country, as Usha ma'am also said, this number comes from nowhere, and this now exists in everybody's mind. And now the census says there's 30,000 or something. This NRC, if you have to believe it, says there's 19 lakh people. 50 lakh is a completely unsubstantiated number, which has almost become now a target or a goal. Yeah, and of course we know that Muslims excluded is not really true. Only Muslims excluded. We know that most of the people who didn't make it were Hindus, an extremely inconvenient truth for the government that truly believed that most of the people that will turn up as illegal immigrants will be actually Bengali-speaking Muslims. I think some people wanted to exclude them. Some people truly believed in the government there that they would be only Bangladeshi Muslims, Bengali-speaking Muslims, but were then surprised about so many Hindus and even people from tribal communities and Nepalis being part of being excluded, and therefore now we have the Citizenship Amendment Act to bring them back. Then the BJP being pro-NRC. In the Assam Assembly, we should remember that the BJP government in power now has trashed the NRC in Assam. And it's odd that the same party would want the NRC nationwide after discrediting it in Assam, because they felt that there was some bias and things like that. And this is Himanta Biswa Sharma, who is the finance minister there, who is responsible for the growth and expansion of the BJP in Assam, has himself, on the day of the NRC being launched, said that it's a useless document and there will be other lists prepared. And then that illegal foreigners, as I said, it's very hard to deport them. Under the CAA even, it's not clear how you can, once you have spent so many years, and also the NRC process or the Foreigners Tribunal process, explaining yourself and proving in every way that you're Indian, to take the benefit of the Citizenship Amendment Act, now you have to claim to be from Bangladesh or Pakistan or Afghanistan, and not forget having to prove that you're persecuted, but you're not able to show that you are actually from these countries. And I don't know what people like us in the south would do. How will we show that we are from those countries? So yeah, this is the final slide, because I thought, in terms of, after spending this much time looking at people losing citizenship, seeing polarization affect people's existence so deeply, I left with hope, because as I said, the people who were in the detention camp for 9 years were able to come out because their neighbor, an Assamese speaker, a Hindu, was suddenly feeling really guilty about the rhetoric and the politics around, and he said that, well, I don't know about other illegal immigrants. My neighbor, the guy who I grew up with, is surely not an illegal immigrant. And then he filed a petition. He collected money from his village and filed a petition in the High Court challenging the Foreigners Tribunal judgment that put him in detention camp. And then the whole family was released. The High Court said that they should not have been detained at all.
We just like, we have enough time, don't worry. There are 2 mics for those inside. For those sitting outside, if you can note this number now, 8939595020. Those outside, those inside can use the mic. Those outside, if you have a question, if you can message this number, 8939595020. Your question will be asked. For those inside, Suhrit will be on the other side with a microphone. I have one here. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. If you have a comment, please be smart enough to convert the comment into a question.
My name is Usha Ramanathan. I want one question to be asked to Mr. Justice A.P. Shah. I have read your articles in the Hindu as well as in Times of India published yesterday. In both the articles you have stated that my question is confined only to CAA. I am not touching upon the other enactments. You have stated that by implementing CAA, certain communities will be treated as second-class citizens in your article in Hindu. And yesterday's article in Times of India was stated they will be losing their citizenship. So far as I could understand, after going through the Citizenship Amendment Act, that it only confers citizenship on certain people and it does not confer citizenship on other people. Whether it is discriminatory or not, that's a matter to be decided by the Honorable Supreme Court. Matter is pending before Supreme Court. Then I want, how do you say that certain communities will be treated as second-class citizens or they will be losing citizenship right? I want you to enlighten on this aspect.
In the first place, what about the refugees who came to India from these 3 countries, Muslim refugees? So they will not be given citizenship solely on the ground that they are Muslims. Is it not correct?
It is not correct.
No, the second, I will answer. I'll answer your question.
Please.
I will answer your question. What is the message you are giving by CAA? That you are saying that this particular community is not welcome. Is it not an issue of identity? That all 6 religions or 5 religions, people belonging to those religions are welcome. But a Muslim who is otherwise persecuted because of his religious beliefs like Ahmadiyya, etc., are not welcome. So, what's the logic for this? And what would be the impact of such a law on the existing population? And please don't try to wish away NRC. It's a very interesting question you are putting, that you leave aside NRC, NPR, take CAA alone, and you are saying that that it doesn't matter whether it violates Article 14 or not. I mean, any law, which is made by the Parliament must pass the test of Article 14. And if the sole objective, and you have to look into the context, Justice Ramanathan, I'm sorry to say this, because you must know the background. What was the thinking throughout of all these parties? This is when Savarkar said that what Jews did for Germany, and they were rightly thrown out. So this is a philosophy, is that the minorities are they should not be treated as equals. So ultimately this will lead to the inequality. Both those who came, Muslims who came here, naturally they will not get it under this particular law, and it will have a very negative impact on the. And one more question I just want to raise, that throughout the freedom struggle, throughout the Constituent Assembly process, the religion was never treated as a basis for citizenship. Suddenly, how come you are treating the religion as the basis only in respect of these 3 Muslim countries? And I don't know what is the logic. Jews are excluded. What kind of a law is this, which doesn't make any rationale for this kind of a law? If the person is, a Muslim is persecuted severely, so he will be refused the entry in India only on this ground. I don't think this is the answer.
No, sir, one question. I'm sorry.
No, please.
We have many people have questions.
Yeah.
There's a lady right there.
Yes. Thanks to Justice and all the panelists for taking time out and explaining very clearly that this is not a Muslim issue. First and foremost, we are grateful to you for that. I want to know from Justice that the huge people movement, especially the student and the youth movement, is it at all having an impact on the policy makers and the government? And how effective is it? Is it going to really bring us the result that we all are working out for? And the second is by the banks, the KYC has included the NPR certificate letter. So suddenly the government says you can't operate your bank accounts without you getting registered under this. How do we handle that? Thank you so much.
To the first question, Madam, I don't have any answer whether this would have an impact on the policy makers. So I will tell you a very interesting address by a Shiv Sena leader in Mumbai. So he said that he referred to this Home Minister's speeches, and somebody said, will not back down an inch. This in spite of protest, etc. So this Shiv Sena leader, Mr. Raut, I think, he said, it's okay that you will not back down, but we will push you. So this is what this is the people's power. This is what.
My name is Zaid. My question to Mr. Justice Shah is, there are 2 things. The Indian government does not recognize the voter ID as a proof of citizenship. And the citizenship, only a citizen can vote for the government. So those who have not voted for the government have voted a bogus vote. And second question is, the Indian passport also is not a proof of citizenship. Now what happens if the countries giving visas to the Indians say that your Indian government doesn't allow citizenship to be, the passport to be a basis of Indian citizenship? We will not allow anybody to get into the land of India or go out of India. So where does India stand in the global market? 196 countries derecognize Indians as Indians. Can you elaborate?
This is a very interesting proposition, because if you do not really accept as a passport as a basic document, then perhaps some might say that this visa could not be issued on this kind of a passport. But this is a reality, that these documents are not going to be accepted. In fact, Mr. Ram pointed out that the former election commissioner, the chief election commissioner, said that Naveen Chawla in the Jaipur List Festival, that the voter's ID should be enough proof for the citizenship. But I don't know because there is so much confusion about the NPR and NRC and what documents are required. But what happened in Assam is a clear proof that it's finally going to put people in tremendous hardship and difficulties.
There are many questions come through message, so I'm going to take one of them, and I'm going to pass this on to Usha Ramanathan. The question is, please tell us whether we should give details documents for the NPR exercise.
I'll only answer if my advice will be taken. Most often it's not. So I will answer that, but I'm going to do a bit of cheating and just go back and say something about, I actually think what the Citizenship Amendment Act does is a very interesting thing. India has always been hospitable to refugees. We have been excellent with refugees. We've not signed on to the Refugee Convention, but we have always accommodated refugees. And I think if you go to YouTube and you see, the Dalai Lama had gone to Holland, and it's a long thing on technology and compassion. And somewhere towards the end of this, he talks about how India has been incredible in allowing for the assimilation of so many people from different parts of the world, and why it is not necessary to think of difference when you see a country like India. So that's what we've been. So if the Citizenship Amendment Act is taken, see, there are people who will benefit from the Citizenship Amendment Act because they've also been living. There are many Hindus who've come from Hindus and other persons of other religion who've come into the country and who've been anxious about what their status will be, and this helps them. So I think if it were a statement, there are two things that this government really needs to do to further what reputation we have acquired over the years, over the decades, as being hospitable to people. The first thing is to remove the idea of illegal when we are talking about people in this country. You're illegal, but you're illegal because the law declares you illegal. You change the law, the idea of illegality vanishes. People are people. And there are multiple other ways in which we can make arrangements. For instance, if we find that many people are coming in from Bangladesh, they're coming from Afghanistan, from Sri Lanka, state to state negotiates to see what kind of responsibility each of them will take. If the state refuses to take that responsibility, you go to the international community, like it has happened in many other places where there is conflict and people move away and they migrate, they go to different places. The world community takes responsibility so that the burden of having to deal with refugees is not on just one country. So there are ways in which it can be done like we are dealing with human beings, and there are ways in which we can do it like we don't care about human beings. The CAA is actually, to the extent that it makes a statement that we care about certain set of refugees, is making a very good statement, except it needs to make it for everybody and not just for the people who I think I like. It's not about me and my liking. So I think to say that the CAA is all right, and to say that it's before the court, there are many things before the court. People don't stop living and we don't stop being citizens while things are in the court. Court will do its job, we'll do our job as citizens. And these two work in parallel. In the process, of course, I forgot the question.
The question is, what do people do when that form comes in front of them?
Yeah. See, the thing is, I think I said it when I spoke. we have to decide whether we are a land of Mahatma Gandhi or not. And if we are a land of Mahatma Gandhi, we've learned farm work.
May I add, here are the specifics. The census questions are these: name of person, start with head of household, relationship to head, sex, including data on third gender, date of birth and age, current marital status, highest education level attained, birthplace. No harm in answering these questions because they belong to the realm of the census. The question, no, 1 minute. The questions not to be answered. Do not answer these questions because you can't be forced to do that. Name as to appear in NPR. Occupation stroke activity. Father's name, mother's name, spouse's name. Nationality as declared. Duration of stay at present address. Permanent residential address. Aadhaar number. Ration card number. Mobile number. Date and place of birth of parents. Place of last residence. Passport number if holder of Indian passport. Voter ID card number. PAN if available. Driving license number if available. Do not answer these questions is the advice that will come. Of course, Usha will say, don't answer any questions.
I could say that, but that's not the point. I mean, the point is that, you know, one of the most, the thing that I found most disturbing in the National Population Register manual, when people are to go out and ask you the questions, and that's filtering into the census now, is relationship with the head of the household. And it's a very, it seems like an innocuous statement, there's nothing innocuous about it. So, and in that manual, they tell you, it is not enough to say whether your nephew or niece or uncle or daughter or son or what. You have to say whether your sister's son, you know, brother's daughter. It's like, and in the new DNA profiling bill, in the schedule, they actually say the DNA can be used for determining pedigree. We have to make a political decision whether we think pedigree is something that we will live with.
Okay, take the next question. There are a lot of questions from everywhere. I have about 7 in my pocket. Few from here, from there.
Good evening. My question, I would like for it to be answered by Justice A.P. Shah. So, would you say, sir, that it is possible for the judiciary to, for lack of a better word in the current context, be infiltrated by the executive? And if so, do you think that our judiciary could possibly be seen as heading towards that in the scenario present today?
Infiltrated is not a, I mean, that's a very strong word. We had a, what I said was that the experience is that the judiciary has, there is a tendency to falter in the face of a over-powerful executive. This happened in emergency. That's the fear. But anyway, the matter is now sub judice. The court is dealing with it, though not very satisfactorily. This is not being heard on an urgent basis, but I still believe that there is a chance. I mean, that simply, even if, I have got a simple answer to this whole controversy. You just remove these religions from that bill. That's all. That takes care of everything. You need not mention any religion. Perhaps you think court, I mean, some sort of judicial innovative measure the court can take and strike down that part of the legislation. I think that would serve the purpose.
So if I may, but that still doesn't solve the problem of the NRC. That doesn't, right? I'm sorry, I had to respond. That still doesn't solve the problem of the NRC. It still means people are going to be discriminated, people are going to be struggling for documents, people who don't have an opportunity to file their case, and like Rohini said, just taking the religion is still not going to take the loop of what is being structured, is it?
No, even if the CAA, suppose it's struck down, or it is modified by the court, even then, I mean, what you say is correct. NRC is a huge issue. So, but there are very inconsistent statements made by the ruling regime. Sometimes they say it's not necessary, they are not going to do it immediately. So perhaps with the CAA gone and there is some verdict on the CAA's validity, the government may think about NRC in a very different perspective. And as of today, at least 10 or 11 states have said that they will not enforce, not implement it.
I'm going to combine two questions I got while and directed to Rohini. Usha did address it partly. The question basically is, if there is a refugee problem in Assam, is there an ideal situation? Another question which is similar was, have we ignored the refugee problem in Assam? And what should we do about it? This is from somebody from outside, so I'm just directing the question.
So it's not as if I'm an expert on the solutions to refugee issue, but in the past there have been ways in which they can be accommodated, and as you said, Usha also said, you don't have to exclude if they are not seen as a problem. But the history in Assam is that they have been seen as a problem, and it has been claimed so often that they are, there's a resource struggle with the locals, that this is why the problem is happening. So this comes from, as I said earlier also, from feeling that the only solution to the refugees thing can be seen as a crisis only if you feel that they are taking over resources or they are in some way a national security problem. But everything that we know globally and also in India is that refugees add to the economy. Refugees also, there's no proof here at least that they're a national security problem. We have many other ways in which there are national security problems. It's also funny that in Assam you had the Ulfa, and that was a national security problem, but there was no thing of they shouldn't be stripped of citizenship or anything like that. There have been some solutions suggested, some of them quite extreme, some of them moderate. There have been among the extreme ones are suggestions that people who are Bengali speakers, Hindus and Muslims in Assam should give up their land which they have owned, and that should be redistributed to the tribal population. This is one of the extreme, and you can see how it can lead to a lot of mess and chaos and unfairness, but it might address some questions. Another solution suggested is that they should not be given voting rights for some years, that their children can be, and this is also discussed. Another solution that has been suggested is that those who have been excluded from the NRC, once they go through the Foreigners Tribunal, and whoever lands up in detention camp, those people don't have to be detained, but they will be kept outside, but on a short leash, as I think a lot of truly people who've come from, say, Sri Lanka, Tamils, they have to report, many of them, in the police station every few weeks or every 6 months, get a stamp in your documents, you're watched all the time, you may be called for any crime that happened in the area. All of these seem like solutions that people have been discussing, but largely it is only if you see them as a problem.
I personally believe that Assami people's, their grievance that their resources are being taken away by people from outside. There is some substance in that. There's a whole history. Please, as Usha said, that the Assam's case stands on a completely different footing. But the one solution could be amnesty, general amnesty, that 10 years, no voting right, certain other rights could be said to be not to be given to them. But after, and the gradual assimilation of all this, the so-called foreigners into the mainstream society in course of time. That's one way of a long-term solution to Assam problem.
Hello sir, this is Shafi, and I'm from ISOS nearby, and we get messages on the WhatsApp saying that we should fill up postcards and send it to the Supreme Court, and that would affect the Supreme Court in taking a decision. That's my first question. And the second question is that I was seeing it on the news that someone has filed a case in International Court of Justice, and also that European Union has passed a resolution against India on CAA. Will all this matter push Supreme Court to take a decision, or will it be restricted to what the judges decide? Thank you, sir.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but don't waste your money on stamp pen. I mean, that's writing letters is not going to help you. Secondly, about the European Union, I think the resolutions have been introduced and not passed. So I don't think it will have any impact on the Supreme Court's determination of the validity of the law. I don't think it's not. The court will decide in accordance with law, not with what the European Union Parliament has said.
You can ask your questions.
Good evening. What proves that I am a citizen of this country? I was born in Tamil Nadu. I'm going to be 81. I don't know what proves it. And at the time when I was born, Justice Shah, there were no birth certificates. Now you'll have to give me some solution.
Well, he doesn't have a solution for you, but I'll just go on to the next question. So, there's a question here. I'm going this.
Good evening to everyone. Just one appeal from many of us here. Can we just stand outside and read out the preamble of the Constitution before we disperse?
Well, we can do that. That's not a problem. You're asking a question. Yes.
I can take a
Hello.
question, then we'll come back.
Hello, my name is Akshit and my question is open to the panel. So I think we can all agree that CAA is discriminatory in nature to a certain religion. So in a hypothetical situation, if the government decides to provide citizenship to Rohingya Muslims who are being persecuted in Myanmar, do you think would that be justified morally and legally?
No, that's the decision of the executive to government to grant relief to Rohingyas. I don't see there is anything morally wrong in that. The Rohingyas is a serious problem. I mean, I don't see there is any problem. But surely, as per the CA, they don't fit in the criteria for citizenship.
We need a refugee law, and we don't have to pick and choose which communities are coming. We can't predict for the future. There might be climate change refugees in the future. There already are. So the problem is that India doesn't have a refugee law, which also answers the previous question which I was thinking about, and therefore there is no need to see the CAA as the only way to tinker only that to solve all these other issues. There are refugees living here, so either have an open door kind of practice that we've been doing, but that has not solved many problems. And I recently found out that the laws have been tinkered with already since 2016 to make it nearly impossible for immigrants who are Muslim coming from any country to apply for even long-term visas once they come here. The laws have already been changed. These numbers of these communities have been listed in many different sections. These communities that are mentioned in the CAA can now open bank accounts after they get long-term visas. They can also buy land. Only Muslims can't. So it's not just the CAA that's the problem, and only tinkering with that will not solve it. We need to understand who is this use of illegal immigrant. It's not defined anywhere. We don't even define refugee anywhere. So if we had a policy or a law to address any kind of refugees, that might be the solution.
This question is for Justice Shah. It's from Sam Daniel. Could you kindly respond to the BJP's argument that even US has had religion-specific citizenship rules for those from specific countries, and that others are governed by existing citizenship laws?
No, I think this question was in relation to the policies of by President Trump about the disallowing the refugees from some country. I take it that way. I'm not sure what the question is exactly, but I must make it clear to you that the Constitution of India is very different from the American Constitution. It is absolutely wrong to say that in America Trump could do something and therefore the same should apply to India. I mean, we have Article 14, we have the whole secular structure of the Constitution, which may not, I mean, which will be very different, which is very different from the American Constitution and the American laws.
Justice Shah, please correct me if I'm wrong, but this question keeps coming up. How does the CAA affect the Indian Muslim? And I think it's necessary for us to call out that the CAA's mischief lies in the fact that it is intended to humiliate the Indian Muslim. The whole idea of bringing in this refugee concept and then trying to say it affects it's ye dene ki baat hai, dene ki nahi. You're trying to bring in this narrative which says the Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, Jains, Christians, I don't know how the Christians got included because in the manifesto it was excluded, but they are sons of the soil. So where else will they go? But the Muslims have other places to go. If somebody is persecuted in Pakistan somewhere, they can go to Saudi Arabia, for instance. So the sons of the soil narrative, which is a very RSS narrative, is what is intended through the CAA. And it is necessary for us to explain to people that the CAA per se, apart from the NRC, the CAA per se is mischievous for that reason.
I entirely agree with you. The idea of if you see the answers given by the government in Parliament when the inquiry was made, how many refugees are there from Afghanistan and the other countries falling in those religions who would be eligible, and you will find that number is negligible. The whole idea is it looks benevolent, but it's not. That's not the purpose of this law. The objective is, as you rightly said, to humiliate a particular community. Perhaps they could have done it with both, because if you see the sons of soil, or the argument was this, that to who the British India, who is entitled to British, the old India, the only people whose ancestry as well as their religion is originated in India. So the Christians, Jews and Muslims, they are all Abrahamic religion, their religions originated somewhere else. That was the original theory. I mean, today, for whatever reason, the Jews and Muslims are excluded, but Christians are there. It's part of CAA, but I don't know the answer.
Good evening. With the implementation of the NRC, there is this view that the non-Muslims in the country would be saved by the CAA because it sort of protects them. But they would also have to prove that they are from specific, these 3 specific countries and have to be from these specific religions and would have to come before December 2014. So does the CAA really protect anyone apart from these specific people from these specific countries? And if it protects the non-Muslims in the country, how does it do it?
I don't think the CAA in any way protect the non-Muslims in the country. Suppose in NRC exercise, a non-Muslim is unable to produce the document and is not included in the register. I don't think there are so many conditions, as you rightly said. It has to be before 2014 and then after 2014. Then they only for 3 specific countries and not from any other countries. So I don't know, but the NRC, we must understand, NRC itself is a very, very, very problematic exercise, and we have seen it in Assam. Just imagine the replication of the same procedure throughout the country. I mean, with the multiplied problems and the hardship it would cause to the people.
Hi, I had a quick reminder and a question. I just wanted to remind us not to forget the atheists, because we are a universal threat to all religions, and we've been excluded from whatever it is that this Act seeks to do. So I hope in the next talks you have, you will remember atheists. In relation to the question, I had a question about the context in Chennai, which has actually been living in an undeclared state of emergency for years. because we've had prohibitory orders consecutively in place for several years now. My question is about the legality of the police deciding what protests they'll allow and what they won't, because what we've had is the police giving permission and protection to pro-CAA gatherings. We can't call them protests because you can't protest in favor of a law. Whereas the people who protest have been repeatedly put in detention, including last night, and we have the FIRs filed. How legal is this? Oh, even for reading the preamble.
In the recent ruling by the Supreme Court on the internet and Section 144, they have explained that the restrictions had to be they read the restrictions very narrowly. So it's really completely unjustified act to allow protest, to support CAA, not protest really, the rally for the support for the, yes, maybe, and not to, I mean, I find that this government is really afraid of the simple protest by students, as I said. Even the word Azadi, I mean, the another problem is that the sedition law continues to be on the statute book. This is the biggest threat to the freedom of speech and expression, and now people will realize that the UP Chief Minister says that if somebody says Azadi, there will be a FIR under the sedition law. So this is the unfortunate turn of events with the sedition law being on the statute.
On the Supreme Court's ruling, the conclusion from that judgment that is referred to, the power under Section 144 CRPC and what happens in Chennai is a police act. It's covered under this. Being remedial as well as preventive is exercisable not only when there exists present danger, but also when there's an apprehension of danger. However, the danger contemplated should be in the nature of an emergency and for the purpose of preventing obstruction and annoyance or injury to any person lawfully employed. Next, the power under Section 144 cannot be used to suppress legitimate expression of opinion or grievance or exercise of any democratic rights and so on. There's more. Subject to judicial review. And finally, while exercising the power under Section 144, the magistrate is duty-bound to balance the rights and restrictions based on the principles of proportionality and thereafter apply the least intrusive measures. Repetitive orders under Section 144 CRPC would be an abuse of power. I suppose this can be challenged.
Question from that side. Yeah.
So we have the CAA-NRC-NPA, and besides that we've had Section 370, then the Data Protection Bill and UAPA. Do you think that all of this change in polity, do you think this uprising against repression, as Mr. Ram put it, has reached or will reach an inflection point so as to reject this Hindutva regime, or is it still within the left and liberal echo chambers? And if so, given that the courts are so lackadaisical and that the media is so irresponsible and the opposition is so unorganized, how sustainable do you think is an independent, people-led movement?
Because really, I'm not sure when the petitions are going to be decided by the Supreme Court. But I really admire those 200 women sitting in park and speaking.
Can I just say this, that there is, in everything, it's not only in this, from displacement to a range of things that have happened over the years, I think people's movements have learned to make a distinction between legality and legitimacy. And what movements and protests do is to make the law illegitimate. And it's a struggle. It's not going to come easy because we don't have power. We don't make the law. We don't have the decision. The state decides what the law will be. The state decides who can use violence. And so there's no power at all. That's why it becomes so important to recognize that the power of non-violence and the power of protest is so extremely important. We had, just as it's a continuation of the earlier one too, where we had Kandabiran, who's kind of been training many of our minds over the years, who's always said that in this country, we started off with fundamental rights, and and then introduced reasonable restrictions. And over a period of time, the restrictions became fundamental. Rights were residual. To exercise which we need permission. So what we see happening now is actually an attempt to turn the tide. And it's something that we cannot not do. You can't not fight for freedom. And so I'm not sure that it's a question of whether this leads to X place. It has shifted already where we were before. And it's made the Supreme Court, the 370 decision where they talk about 144 didn't come in a vacuum. That vacuum was filled actually, the fact that there's no vacuum is because there are all these people on the ground speaking truth to power.
I want to sound a slightly different note. I think we should believe that this is going to succeed. Be bold. Be bold. Everyone here said that. But also have some confidence that this is going to grow and not going to fizzle out, because it's been remarkably sustained. And it's far beyond anyone's expectations. I still struggle with my understanding. What are the drivers behind this that has brought so many young people out on the streets, women in Shine-Bagh and various other places, every day in Kerala, so on. So I think if you are already, you have doubts, then you cannot.
So this is. Okay. This is a question which is kind of a continuation to this discussion, so I'll bring it in here. The question is, how do we take this awareness to villages and little towns? To people, the lower classes, lower sections of society, how do you make them understand the nuances of this issue? How do you convince them not to fill that form? Who's going to do that, and how are we going to do this? And that's the question, so anybody can take that question.
I feel that it's only the political class can provide answer to this. The opposition, you see, it's in students who will be protesting in universities, there will be protests done by civil society, but for villages and towns, we need really some moving force. But I must tell you the realities of the rural India. It appears whatever I heard from the UP reports, that it's sort of a impression is created, and many people believe that this with CAA and NRC, all these Muslims, those who are wealthier or in a better position, they'll be all ousted from this country, and these properties, etc., will be distributed amongst those so-called sons of soil. This is the impression created amongst the people. So that fight is very hard to convince people and to talk about peace, amity. But what I see the change is that when the entire agitation by Muslims is also is about the constitution, is about India, is about the Indian flag. So that narrative is very different, which might make a difference even in the smaller places and the rural India, perhaps. But the position is not. That it's not percolated there. That sense of the opposition against these laws.
Question from here. Hello. I'm going to make a very controversial question because I do not stand. Yeah. So I think the question needs to be reframed. I don't think that CAA-NRC-NPA, I don't think this is the question, because first I want to talk about who are the Muslims who are given citizenship. You can be given citizenship by birth, by the registration, by naturalization, by territory, all of this. This takes care of almost 99% of Muslims across the world. I think everyone can agree to that over here. Who are we talking about? We're talking about a very, very specific set of Muslims, because that's the claim, because you're saying it's a very anti-Muslim claim. My point is, how do you say this is non-Muslim and you're able to give so many people, and plus I think a few people on the stage, you were able to say how the CAA 2019 is just one part of several laws. So this is an act of inclusion. If there are 5 people, You don't give it to one and you give it to the other, then it's exclusion. But if there are 100 people and then you give it only to 3, how is that exclusion and not inclusion? My point is, how are you able to have this ideological contradictory?
Question is incomprehensible.
No, I think it's no. I'm sorry because I have to make it very short because they give me a very short period of time and I have to.
So I'll try and answer because I feel like I've comprehended a little bit where this is coming from. What I said earlier, which I think is what you referred to, is that all the different laws, all of them are not for different people. They are for the same group of people, and CAA is simply announcing it, or perhaps for some credit. It has been done secretly and quietly, not secretly, well, it's been done through executive orders. It's been done over time since 2016 or even 15. And for the same group of people chosen as beneficiaries for this, and Muslims cannot get it through naturalization anymore, cannot get long-term visa, which is the first step towards getting, towards applying for citizenship, cannot buy land, cannot open bank accounts. This has already happened, and the CAA is simply putting a headline for it. Okay, all right. I'm just telling you what I know for sure. We'll share emails after and I'll send something.
Just one additional thing. I know you were the question was, what do you do with reaching the rural areas and people? I think actually the one thing that I'm not seeing happening is some kind of introspection and change among political parties that have been responsible for where this started. It didn't start today. It is culminating in this now and they're using it. But UAPA didn't come only now. It's been there for a very long time. The idea that you can have extreme laws, excessive power with the state didn't start today. And the parties that started it actually have an opportunity today to change their agenda and to make that agenda public and to make a public resolution and a promise that they will restore freedom to people if they come back to power, because these freedoms have been whittled down over the decades. And I would want to name the Congress in this and say that the Congress has been responsible for many of the problems that we have today. And they need to work to set this right. It's not enough for them to sit there and make brownie point statements, in the press.
Sir, one question, sir. We get immigrants because they have their own problems. And you have to make a study whether the migrants wants such details. You have to study them and then put it into the form, to the government.
Sir, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Please, one more, Kelly. Please ask questions. Like I said, please change your comment to a question.
I am with the Hindus people also, and Christian people also live in this country, this glorious country.
Andor Kelly. Yeah, you can go.
Hi sir, my name is Isha. First of all, with all due respect, I'm glad that a generation so older than us is sitting as a panelist. Well, I'm saying this why? Because so I think majority of my friends and I also come from a household where they're so pro BJP for some reason. Like, I try and make them understand that CAA is wrong, but they will come up with things like, how Bangladesh and Pakistan were divided on the basis of religion. And I've told them actually that how religion cannot be involved with politics, but they're like, religion has been involved since the partition time. And how like Muslim and Christian countries are not tolerable of other religions. And to some extent, I'm not able to answer them. So I just want to ask you as perfectionist to how to answer that I can't.
You give me your father's telephone number.
Just one announcement.
Your experience where the parents are they're conservative, let's say, and in every case their daughter is in rebellion against their views. Hello. Hello, with regard.
Question here.
with regard to filling up the forms, they said few columns we should not fill it up. So what if the form is, doubtful citizen? What do we do? That is the first question. Why should we fill up that form with those columns? And continue to the next question. What if the CAA has not been struck down, and what action we as an Indian citizen should go ahead with?
This form is the National Population Register. We are not talking about NRC. That's the first step. So there's no legal authority of law which would make questions. And there's no question of saying doubtful. This is simply part of the census exercise. That's what it's supposed to be. But they are now trying to link it with other things. They won't answer these questions. This is
You can all contribute to that if you
So, yeah, Ritika, who's sitting outside, has a question for Usha ma'am, which is house listing operation of the census is for the confidentiality of house listing data. The latter has been notified on 7th January and has 30 variables including caste.
No, I think we have to start breaking myths. It's a long time since, maybe at some time the census was in fact a confidential exercise. But the idea of confidentiality has got completely perverted in the past 10 years. I mean, it started, unfortunately, with the UID. It's gone on. See, we need to understand that from digitization to collection of data to being able to see every person and to know where each of us is. For the state and anyone in power, including the corporates, to be able to do what they want with our data and with us. This is where we've been headed. We've kind of, so many places I go and I see people who say, the number. And I've often wondered, why are you giving all kinds of information to all manner of people? We've been trained into not asking any questions. We've been trained into thinking we've already given so much data that how much does a little more matter. But we are actually ceding control over our lives when we do this. So this census exercise at this stage, I must say this too, that under the census law, there is no penalty for not answering census questions. And you're not duty bound. It's not a legal obligation for anybody to answer census questions. So if I find that it's uncomfortable for me, I don't want to do it, I can say, I'm sorry and move on. And at this stage, it is not, we shouldn't focus so much on legality, and that's what all the movement is about. That we forget whether it is legitimate for them to ask us or not. And we do not need to participate in things which we don't want to participate. I really believe this is a period when we have to educate not just the government in power today, but all those who've enjoyed, who've experienced power and believe that power is the right of those who are in a position. It is not their right. We need to renegotiate this idea of power. And if we have to start with the census for it, so be it.
Good evening to the panelists. Towards your right, sir. My name is Ganesh Raj, and my question is towards Justice A.B. Shah. In the course of the discussion, I heard you saying that there is some substance in the agitation and the problems that's being faced by the people of Assam. So if that is so, should the borders be sealed at least now, or should there be a free inflow and outflow of people? If my question is going to be answered not in affirmative,
didn't get the first part of your question.
Sir, in the course of the discussion,
I said that there is some substance in their reverse.
If that is so, should the borders be sealed at least now, or should there be a free inflow and outflow of people irrespective?
Which border you are talking about? Bangladesh?
The borders of our nation.
With Bangladesh?
Be it Bangladesh.
No, cannot seal borders is not always the question. The question is, how do we see our borders? And if you look at Bangladesh, for instance, you find that the climate change is having a huge impact on them. We are going to have environmental refugees in a very short time. The question is, who takes responsibility for all of this, and how do we treat these changes that are happening? If we are going to, it's a very strange country we live in, where every new law that has come in says that our freedom of speech can be curbed since 1951, that it can be curbed in the interests of maintaining friendly relations with foreign states. And then we have the maximum antagonism that we create to our own neighbors. I think we really need to look at what this means, because, which is why I said when the citizenship law kept getting amended, in the beginning, the amendment was, they said we'll bring it in because we had militancy from Pakistan. Then now we've made economic migrants and environmental refugees who are coming from Bangladesh into some kind of a threat to us. I think we really need to have a political understanding of how we treat neighbors, how we treat various kinds of refugees and migrants, and also let's remember that internal migration is also a huge issue. If you look at where this discussion is going, not here, I mean in the public domain, you find that everybody is becoming more and more, I am from Assam, I am from Meghalaya, I am from Tamil Nadu, I am from here, I am from there. Nobody should be allowed here. They should have less rights when they come here. We read the preamble, but we forget that one of the fundamental things we have in the preamble in the constitution is that we can move around anywhere in the country. There's a certain freedom. We can settle where we want in the country. And we are sacrificing all of this for I don't know what. So maybe we need to have a proper political discussion on how we understand ourselves. And let's also remember, it's not only Bangladeshis coming here. Indians go to Bangladesh too. Those figures are out. So why are we treating it like we are some kind of, characters who everybody is running after and we need to safeguard ourselves from people? What is this politics?
They did pass, the central government did pass, sanction some money to erect electric fence along the Bangladesh-India border. It wasn't possible because they realized much of it is the river, is the border, and it's hard to do it, apart from expensive, and not just have fences, but also then you have border guards, right, the BSF and everything. And over the years, people have been coming in and going out. It has been a unintentionally porous border because of both the corruption and the compassion of people on the border. When the Rohingyas came in large numbers from Bangladesh, from Burma to Bangladesh to here, many of them, there are in the paper you'll find BSF people saying that they let them in because of compassion, because they were literally huge numbers were coming when their villages were being burnt. But also people, the BSF, so there is the existence of the fence or the border or a wall will not necessarily stop the immigration or the migration, not only because of all the things that Usha ma'am said, because of the reality of why people move, but also the reality of keeping them out is extremely complicated, where you have organizations that are supposed to man the border make this into a rent-seeking exercise, where you can pay something and be around for some time. If you are known to be illegal, nobody is going to throw you out if you've paid the right people. On the other hand, if you have lived in a place for a really long time, you could be thrown out because precisely you didn't pay the right person or you just annoyed somebody. So I don't know how, given the reality of actually policing people and the reality of numbers coming in, not necessarily like lakhs as people fear, it's not as easy to only say that we can stop this by erecting walls.
My name is Saeed. The question is to Rohini. See, regarding the issues of refugees and other security things you have spoken, when it comes to Tamil refugees, the issue is genocide, it is not the religious issue. When it's come to Rohingya Muslim, it's purely a religious issue, and also they are against the government supporting. But when it comes to debate, the Tibetans are supporting to the China because we are against their policies. So there is some liberal. So do you think that really the refugee laws or the security systems are working inside, or the government agenda is India? There is every policy has mostly contradictions. 8 lakhs annual income revenue people have comes under reservation, but if you have a 25,000 rupees AC, you don't have a ration card. Like those kind of issues.
Do you have problem with the contradiction, or? Why is there a problem with the contradiction? If the realities are contradictory to some idea of, I think it's fine. It's just that you need to define who you're accepting and why, who's a refugee, what is persecution, and these are not, we don't invent any of this. This is all there in the world, people are using it, the UNHCR is using it when people get long-term visas. The reason Rohingyas until 2014 or 15 got long-term visas to live because they were able to prove persecution. The reason why Sri Lankan Tamils were allowed, although the central government didn't want, was because the Tamil Nadu government asked for that to happen. Sri Lanka, here we are fearing, the central government in India may fear that as an LTS or anyone has, because they will, in fact, if you were part of that kind of movement and as long as you didn't make human rights violations and kill people, you would be given asylum. So there are processes that you can come here. We don't have to make it into a country-based thing. It just can be based on humanity. And that there'll be no contradiction in that.
Just one thing I want to add. See, India has not signed the Refugee Convention. The first thing they should do is to sign the convention and then to determine, to whom to admit, and that's a matter of the passing appropriate legislations, which are rational and which are really based on the humanity and not on the basis of this narrow agendas.
Good evening, sir. Thank you. And thank you so very much for this evening. But we can't expect from the government to be in fairness, to be just or to be sensible. We surely can expect the courts to be. Because if we lose that confidence in the courts, that means we are very close to being a banana republic. Be that as it may, I have one simple question. As a citizen, if I approach the court that I have a voter's ID, I have a passport, and about naturalization, how would the courts view it, sir? You yourself have been Chief Justice of Court. How would you view this? If I come to you, I am a holder of a voter's ID. I have a passport for many, many years, and through a process of naturalization, I do become a citizen of India. If I come with that question to you, forgetting the CAA and NRC, everything else, how would you make your call as a judge? Thank you, sir.
Naturally, I would make a call on the basis of documents which are placed before by the aggrieved person before me. I will have to take a call on that. But just the answer should be in favor of the accepting citizenship or recognizing citizenship. That was a hopeful answer.
Because court should, finally they have to decide. We may not be having birth certificates, we may not be having our fathers. And so we were not going to give up our right to criticize the higher judiciary or any kind of court.
Question from there.
My name is Ahmed. What is the test to identify the reasonable classification coming under the Article 14 of our Constitution? And it will be helpful if you explain it in relation to the CAA, and on what criteria can a law be labeled as arbitrary?
An explanation in the twin. Just take a look at it. It will give you a very good explanation.
Short answer.
Yeah, give a short answer.
So the test that the Supreme Court employs and has historically employed to decide whether laws violate Article 14 or not is a test of reasonable classification. Now broadly, this test might sound a bit complex, but is actually very easy to understand. What it requires is three things. First, that the objective of the law should be something which is non-arbitrary. And second, that the classification that it draws, that is the distinction it makes between the classes of persons or things that it protects and those persons or classes or things that it doesn't protect, must be intelligible. And thirdly, that distinction it draws must have a rational nexus with the objective of the law. Now let me give you an example. If, for example, the state wants to provide housing to low-income households or to low-income families and wants to provide free housing, then the state will draw a distinction saying that all those persons or all those families that earn, say, below 3 lakhs per annum would be low income and all others would not be low income. So here you can clearly see that there exists a distinction between the classes of persons. And in this with the objective, because the objective is to provide free housing to families which are low income. So therefore such a law would not violate Article 14. It draws a number of classifications. It makes a number of classifications. First, it makes a classification on the basis of countries. It distinguishes Afghanistan, Bangladesh and Pakistan from all other countries. Now there's no rational nexus with the objective of the law, because the objective of the law here would presume is to protect those who have faced religious, because there isn't necessarily a clear determining principle which allows the state to distinguish between religious and political persecution. What is the difference, for example, that a Hindu from Pakistan might have faced in terms of persecution that is so distinct from what a Tibetan might face at the hands of the Chinese. So nobody here is saying that don't grant benefits to these communities who have come from these three countries, but make this a law that is equal and that does not classify, underclassify, and that provides these benefits equally to everyone that is equally situated. Just to sum up finally, the basic fundamental premise of this is that equals have to be treated equally while unequals have to be treated unequally. So the law allows the state to provide for benefits such as reservations, for example, where people are inherently in unequal standing and therefore we need to achieve substantive equality. You need to provide special benefits to certain categories of people. But where people are already equally situated, such as, for example, Hindus from Pakistan, refugees from Pakistan, and Ahmadiyya refugees from Pakistan, then you cannot distinguish between the two. So that is